Hey, hi everyone. Welcome back again. Right now we can start on the second part of our session. So we'll be having our speakers as part of the panel, as well as Kevin, who's our Vice President of the Cybersecurity chapter, as the moderator to discuss some of the topics in cybersecurity and some of the new changes that we are facing for our new normal and working from home. So, Kevin to kick off the session. So, Kevin, please.
Okay, very glad to be here this afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone. Let's start off with a simple poll, right? I ask the poll to be launched, and I would like everyone to fill in your answers in the poll, and then we look at the results. And let's look at the results from the poll and see what's for the audience that's online today. To see that what are the results, right? So the first question is, wow, everyone has definitely worked from home, and that's definitely true even in this time, right? And that's good, right? To understand that majority, or at least those on the call, we have almost everyone, right? In fact, everyone is working on from home, and the tools that your company use are well secure. Well, 81% of you think that yes, they are secure, so that's good. And then for number three is you are aware of the cybersecurity threats. Okay, that's a great response as well. It's good to know that that there's a lot of awareness, right, in terms of the cybersecurity threats that are resulting from this whole shift due to the pandemic for everyone that's working from home. Do you think there's an increase in cybersecurity? Again, a very resounding yes from everyone to say that that cybersecurity threats are really on an increase, right? And you do have plans to work on those in the next 3 months. So I hope that this session here is definitely going to be very useful for everyone to really increase your knowledge. And as what the panelists has shared today, this is the new normal, and working from home has transformed how we work, right? But it also created, and as a result, because everyone is using digital tools and technology and interacting online, it creates really a bigger playground, right, for cyber criminals to be able to tap on those opportunities, right, for us, for cyber threats, and really to take the opportunity to, create more issues for us as we move to the in the digital workspace. So there's definitely indeed a critical need for us not only to be aware, but also to understand what are the tools, the threats that we're using, also take action in terms of some of the mitigations that we can put in place to help us address some of these cyber threats, right? So I'd like to open the panel by asking our speakers, right, some of the questions and share their thoughts on this trend in the cyberspace as we move from working in the office to working from home, and as we tap on some of the technology and tools and interacting with the data that we use for work, right? How would they see these threats as that are increasing as a result of this, right? So the first question I have for the panel today is really: do you see an increasing trend in cybersecurity incidents as a result of work shifting, right, to the new normal? Having to be able to work remotely, at the same time accessing information from new locations, from new devices. Could you share some examples, right? So I'd like to open the panel for the discussion, and maybe Xiangxun, you can share as a start on your thoughts on that question.
Sure. I think with increased remote work, clearly there is an increased threat. And it's really driven by this notion of the expanded digital attack surface. Many organizations start off by building up cybersecurity defenses by protecting what technologies you're using within the office premises. And in that sense, in an old adage, we call it raising the high walls.
Mm.
But now you have people that are operating outside the walls. And these people, the employees, naturally have access to, what you might see to be confidential or even sensitive information, the likes of private information, personal data, company sensitive information, intellectual property, and the list goes on. So it is with that notion that now you have more people. It's not that we have never done it before. Before COVID, actually, most of us are already mobile warriors. But now what you are seeing is that instead of maybe the 20%, the 30%, the 40% of your employees that are mobile in nature, you have near to 100%. And that has enhanced or expanded the digital attack surface. That's one. Number two is that when we are operating from the home, majority of us are using consumer grade routers, which may not have security features. I think recollecting some of the initiatives that CSA, Cybersecurity Agency, has tried to roll out, which is this IoT security labeling scheme, of which the first wave is to attempt to label the cybersecurity risks of consumer grade routers and IoT devices. That is really an attempt towards classification of devices so that consumers understand when they buy a product, is it going to provide a better security position or that of a weaker security position? Because it is a misnomer out there that the more money I pay for a router, it means that it's more secure. It need not be the case. It could be just that this router provides more services, more functionality towards my needs rather than a specific outcome like a cybersecurity outcome. So I think clearly the threat is there. In a more recent activity that we've done for our client in terms of a phishing exercise, this client actually on the baseline perspective, we observe just sub 20% click rate. But at the start of the circuit breaker, we launched the phishing exercise, and really we took advantage of the COVID-19 situation and general people's interest to get access to hygiene products, whether is it hand sanitizers or masks, or just maybe like health benefits that they could tap into. And we saw this number rising easily 10%. So the threat actors out there also play into such trends, and they capitalize on the social behaviors, the social demands that every one of us have to really find that opportunity to breach these high walls as well. And it doesn't help that we are all largely operating in individuals. We're not necessarily working with our teams. We cannot ask somebody over our shoulder and say, I'm receiving this mail, do you think it's something fishy or not? So when you're alone, you try to make the best decisions, and unfortunately that might not be the best. Maybe the rest can also chip in here.
Right. What about Ryan or Johnny? Do you have any thoughts on?
So I can go next. So what we see in Trend Micro as a security vendor is that there really has been an increase in attacks, due to the situation of the pandemic. First and foremost, the attackers have a new social engineering lure to leverage, which is any topic about coronavirus, right? So, at the beginning of the pandemic, when we were going to lockdown, a lot of people and a lot of teams don't have enough information about coronavirus. So people needed to educate themselves, right? So the attackers actually used this as a social engineering lures for email, for fake websites, just like I mentioned before. So the use of that has increased significantly in the past few months. And also, aside from that, one of the key things that we have noticed is that the attacks or the probing against certain protocols that are commonly used in office environments or corporate networks has increased in the internet, across the internet. So what do I mean by that? So for example, probing attacks against FTP, SSH, SMB has increased significantly the past few months. And the reason for that is that a lot of these services are now made internet facing, publicly available. And this contains potentially information and documents from corporate networks. And the attackers we've seen attackers trying to brute force into those connections. And hopefully with the hope or the intent to either steal information or take control of a particular device or endpoint, right? So yeah, we can, Trend Micro can validate that all of these attack scenarios are being leveraged by attackers, brought about by our unique setup now with the pandemic.
So it's really, having greater attack surface like what Samson mentioned, but also increasing in the volumes of the attacks that you have observed, right? What about Johnny? You have any thoughts?
So I'm totally agree on I think both the attack surface and in fact the phishing part. Why I would actually say so is I think in the current state, right? I think when they're forced to work out of office, right, email becomes a very key part of the communication. So sometimes not only does the volume goes up, but example, I think if you talk about even the medium enterprises, if they have no other means to start doing the communication, be it from business transaction, actually more information end up being shared through the email. And this, I think if you come from the other angle, that's really what drives also the behavior from, okay, they start to target emails because now with the increased volumes and the more of the information being shared over email, that becomes really quite a goldmine in terms of actually looking at. So these are something I think as you move ahead, I think is email, while it's actually the easiest way to communicate, it needs to be something that progressively needs to be tightened up as well in terms of what is the information you actually transact over there and share as well.
I'd just like to add on to Johnny. I think it's exactly poignant, right? That email has become the main vehicle for us to communicate and collaborate with our colleagues to the extent that there is a sense of desensitization. The natural guards that we have of this communication channel is lowered because of these remote work arrangements. And that has actually created the behavioral weakness for organizations, right, in the employees that social engineering and phishing attacks can actually punch through.
Right. In fact, recently there was a report, right, that and CSA sort of did a survey, right, of 1,000 participants. Actually, probably only 57% were able to identify emails, right, with suspicious attachments. But actually, if you try 8 times, the percentage dropped to about 4%, right? So actually, in an attack where, in a phishing attempt, if you try many times enough, really, you'll get through and you'll get it right, and then you get, you can compromise, right, as a result. It just means that because for us, we need to get it right every time, but for the attacker, you need to get it right once, right? That's the challenge for a lot of us as we use emails as the default mode for communications, and it becomes like what Santos said, a bit desensitized to the awareness of that security.
It doesn't help that we are also observing threat actors that are applying artificial intelligence and machine learning in their phishing campaigns, where, like you mentioned, because the adversary doesn't need to do it one time right, they can do it in multiple waves, right? And in each response, they can tune and shape the communications in such a way that addresses the organization well. So that actually makes it tougher for the defenders, right, to actually be guarded against such things. And it's not so much just the technology component, but also the human element. So as people, as we are now reducing our guard, the sensitivity towards this kind of communications is lowered. Then you have a more intelligent threat actor that's out there that is gamifying your responses. So the old adage is that the favor is leaning towards the threat actor is very real right now.
Yeah. So I think it's the same point that I think effectively, like what Ryan said, is running as a business, right? They're doing the same techniques while the analytics parts, they are also harvesting the data they can see from the email traffic and actually using that to actually fine tune even text as it goes along as well. Yeah.
So what are some of the major risks, right, that you see as our work shift, right, to the hybrid work environment? And what are some of the, as we use the tools, like, we adopt certain tools for maybe for video conferencing, for communication with each other, for even transacting, for business operations, right? Like even e-payments and so on. What do you think are some of the major risks that you see, as we shift into a hybrid work environment, right? Maybe Ryan, you can, start off.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah. So what are some of the risks, right, as we move into a hybrid work environment? Adopting the tools for communications, for executing transactions for businesses, payments and stuff, or even video calls and so on, right? I mean, what do you think are some of the major risks that you will see as these activities starts to increase, right, for businesses as they work from home?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I would take this opportunity to answer the question in the Q&A board about use of Office 365, right? Because I think that ties into the question. So I know that I recommended even the software as a service as like a mitigating factor when you against ransomware. But again, one thing that you need to take a look at that is that when you use of these services, then there can be a unique point of weakness, which is the credentials. So if you use passwords, if your credentials has been phished, then whatever you have access to, whatever documents you have access to, whatever services you have access to, then that can be used by the attacker, right? So that I think that would be the first security weakness that we need to think about if we decide to enter into a cloud or a hybrid model. How the authentication becomes the key weakness. So whatever you can do to strengthen the authentication. So for example, if it's credentials, and then if you can implement two-factor authentication, that would be great, right? So for other services, for example, API-based services, strong tokens, and protecting those tokens would be would be necessary for the protection of those authentications. So yeah, to answer the question, these environments, authentication is key, and that's something that you really need to strengthen.
I think that's very practical, right? I mean, just as simple as something as 2FA, second factor. People a lot of times, we see that may have been taken for granted. I don't know whether Samson and Johnny have any comments on whether the adoption of 2FA, is it really well established, and and do you still see like in the market, right? People are not taking that seriously, right? Yeah.
I mean, the fair fact, I think just now, even in my talk, I actually does preach that as almost to a hygiene level.
Yeah.
And in fact, today it is a lot easier. I think if you are using any SaaS, right? I mean, be it from Google or even from, especially Microsoft. I mean, there's authenticator you could be using it, and they do support 2FA even for SMS and stuff like that. It is not so. If we fall back, one thing I think the key risk is always on the misconfiguration portion. Right? And the misconfiguration is not only in terms of controls, but I think like to the point from the questions in the chat, right? So if you want to say there is going to be a pain that you have to take, because one of the things I think that happens, especially for SMEs, as they rush to be able to work from home, they start to adopt platforms that they're not familiar with, and then that falls apart. And if you also need to take a chance that traditionally you're quite comfortable. People are accessing, shared drives in office now. They're doing it from home, and you need to redo that diligence to go and start review. Okay, who has access to what documents, and make that conscious effort to review the configuration. And then, of course, I think the key part here, I think normally, if I think what he mentioned here in terms of stuff, if it is a corporate asset. as much as whoever wants to complain that actually wants to use it for their personal use, I think you have to lock it down. If it belongs to the company, I think one of the key first things we will actually, which is something that doesn't cost too much. It doesn't cost much. In fact, it's actually to turn off all the administrative rights for that machine. And I think that is the most cost-effective way to actually prevent anything. I think even from a ransomware perspective, in that sense, of malware, even when people attack that machine, there'll be at least one measure you need to take. So.
I think for us, we had at the start of this COVID management situation, some clients that actually reached out to us to tell us that basically I want to adopt 10 different products and services to be able to enable my people to be able to work remotely. I think also at the very start of the year, we look at the first quarter of the year, there have been no shortage of security advisories, of networking solutions, VPN solutions, even the virtual desktop infrastructure solutions, right, that have been posted. And that's really also when we observe the threat intelligence activities, right, that informs us that basically the threat actors shifted their game to target core networking infrastructure during this period of time, because they realized that many organizations will be using these technologies, and it is the perfect watering hole situation to be able to capitalize. One fell swoop, I can get access to many people. So that's one. For those clients, we actually had to go through security analysis and risk assessments for them to really look at the end-to-end construct. And I think it is absolutely important to go through what I call the peacetime preparation, right? The data classification approaches, really understanding which categories of information would you put in which kinds of repository at what security level. And that really accompanies exactly the points that have been mentioned earlier about embracing multi-factor authentication. Today, I think it would be very careless for anyone to say that, oh, multi-factor authentication is very difficult to implement, because the reality exists that there are, I wouldn't say free, but near free solutions that are there, whether is it Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator. And if you're willing to pay a bit more, software solutions, the likes of Duo Security, they exist. So to be laissez-faire about it, to say that, MFA is very complicated, very difficult to implement. Actually, the majority solutions that we depend on, whether is it G Suite or is it Microsoft 365, they are already compatible. So that would be part one. The second thing is that I think in day-to-day, employees actually are very careless about their credentials, to the extent that I think many of us, when we register for events, we make use of our corporate credentials. To that, I mean email accounts, right? But human is human. To be able to handle hundreds of passwords is very difficult. Yeah. Many of us do some kind of combination of ABC, 1, 2, 3, and then whenever a password change is required, I put a dash at behind, add another number, or I dash A, and so on and so forth. And when I say this, is actually, we all of us have a bit of a laugh, because in some pattern, we actually practice it, because we are human. Yeah. How can we really create novel, unique, and very hard to guess passwords? It's almost impossible. And what we don't realize is this: when the third-party service provider actually gets breached and the credentials get leaked, they get an understanding of how we are permutating the passwords that we might actually use in our corporate environment. And when that happens, that makes the job of the threat actor very easy, because the permutations are easy. They can then lead towards a credential stuffing attack. Whether is it with our public-facing services that we might expose as a part of our corporate services, or really more intimately our credentials that we use within the Active Directory, and the list goes on. So I think I just wanted to give a few of that perspective. What we realize is that many of our clients actually haven't arrived at the good strategy to address third-party services and credential leaks in that nature.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point, right? Because what it means is that when you leak, when a password get compromised, right, actually strengthens the way people will guess, for attacker to guess the passwords, and and especially the permutations are limited, right, by human imagination, and that's something that you can easily train an AI to guess further based on the past pattern of how you can then detect, how can then compromise your other passwords that you might have, used and thought of, right? And that brings about a very good question, right? Because we talk about passwords and how difficult it is to remember, but yet the world is still using passwords. Any thoughts on that? And why is this so, right? And are there alternatives that really we can go towards, right? Because it seems that we are not able to get rid of passwords still today.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think I also mentioned something about password managers.
Yeah.
So actually, one way we could do is actually like what we said, right? The things that's a bit more social, or even though it's work related, just use the password manager and generate something, so that it has no correlation to whatever you use.
It's very random.
Yeah. So because that's random, I mean, if for heaven's sake, you forget that, I mean, just reset it. Yeah, but at least I think whatever is like closer to the internal systems or this, then it's that's something you need to keep to heart. But anything outside, you can just use. So sometimes you look at it, I mean, Chrome has that. I mean, the Google, you just use that and generate a random password just to do the registration. And after that, I mean, because basically it's not something you really need to remember, and it's just not correlated to you anymore if you just use that. So I think that's what recommendation I would say. So, yeah.
Yeah. For some of our clients, basically, we want to shift them towards a passwordless journey.
Yeah.
And I think really that anchors itself into a few key things. One is certificate-based identity, particularly from a service-to-service or machine-to-machine communications standpoint. You want to establish the identity of the application or the identity of the system at a certificate level. Now, when we say that, some of our clients actually come back to us and say it's very complicated. And no doubt it's complicated because you almost have to embrace the whole notion of public key infrastructure, having key management systems, certificate management systems. But once you go through that journey, actually, I think all of us have mentioned this in effect, right? The identities form the key to the access of your data. So that would be one very important measure to address that. The second part is that I think the cost of hardware tokens has actually come down. My last check with YubiKey, for example, or even the Google Titan keys, they are in the ballpark of maybe $50, right? And $50, you might think, oh, it's something I can buy a lot more material goods that I can benefit myself. But this $50 could actually help you deal with the whole swath of services that you are engaged with, whether is it Google's set of services, Microsoft's set of services, or any other party that actually relies on FIDO-related authentication approaches. And that also means OAuth is actually included there. Many of the commercial off-the-shelf products are also getting into the bandwagon of embracing these hardware tokens, right, that are FIDO-enabled. So I think these would be two key features. And I think as a actual consumer outside of a commercial life, right, I also use my own hardware tokens. I have a set of YubiKeys, primary and secondary. I have also my backups in place so that I don't have to fumble with password managers, for example, because clearly it becomes such a fuss to deal with passwords.
Right. But yeah, it's a very good suggestion, right, to use YubiKeys and so on. But why has the world not taken on yet, right? Because a lot of the services that, SaaS services that we use, right, whether they don't really offer that as a default option. And many probably of the attendees may not know really how to activate it or how to even link those tokens to those services, right? Why do you think that is so, right?
I think you alluded to it, which is security by default.
Yeah.
Security by default is a notion that is pushed by those among us that are really feeling the pain of being the defender. But actually, from the manufacturer standpoint, from the developer standpoint, they want to be able to show the value of the functions, the value of the features that they are building out for their products. And to that, if I put security by default upfront, and it is first step, please register the hardware token. And then the deal user, the consumer will be like, I don't even have a hardware token. Can you package it into the deal? So they haven't thought it through. And that makes security by default quite challenging in nature.
Yeah. That's a bit challenging, right? I mean, going back to, there's a question here, going back to what Johnny has shared just now about password managers, right? So the question was, can't password managers be hacked as well, right?
So there's nothing unhackable in this world. I think if we have, I mean, if we come from even the offensive part, you talk to anyone, the point is, as long as you're targeted, there's one way. Like we mentioned just now, right? The hacker will always try numerous times. The same way, I think, as long as you're targeted, there's nothing that's foolproof. Right? So one thing I did mention, I think earlier, is that while I talk about the password manager, that was out of convenience, but also limited to less critical. It's because if you're going to use something in the cloud or whatever, there's something you need to. So it's really trying to do a bit of that separation. Wherever is more critical, you need to keep close at heart that things that even if it's like you have to use the word credential to register for something, that's something, but it's outside the organization, then the password manager is one convenient way that you could actually just generate that. Of course, if the organization has all the other things in terms of the tighter passwordless approach, then that would be good. But I think, like what we say, it will take a while because, and we talk about media enterprises, all this, then this is the way where it is the change of mindset that subconsciously you need to start separating things that's critical and things that's, I would say, work, but still more social in that relation as well, whenever you think of handling data as well as the passwords as well.
I would add on that despite the fact that password managers can be broken, and at that instance, you might think that you have lost control of your access, it is still a better solution than you going with, today my password is rainbow.1. Tomorrow, when I'm forced to change, it's rainbow.2, rainbow.3, and so on and so forth. It's so guessable that actually your password is worse off than the broken password manager, which actually all these security vendors that are providing password managers, they are fairly diligent in terms of patching up. And it's really for the consumer to really catch up as well, and then quickly do all the mass resets. And I think many of them actually make it very easy for the mass resets to happen. So it is still the better solution than us trying to be smart about our passwords and guessing what's the next permutation we want to go towards.
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of adoption of this alternative ways of securing your identity, right? Do you think that where do you think is it depends on, right? Is it depending on the software providers to provide these capabilities and making it easy to integrate, or is it more of awareness of the end user, right? To figure out that these are the things that are available, and therefore they need to go beyond passwords to secure their systems, right? What are your thoughts on that?
So,
Johnny, go ahead.
Yeah, if I want to say, I think awareness is still the key.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think when we use the term awareness, mostly when we talk about cyber, actually it's not just about the threats, but actually understanding what are the solutions as well. So this part actually comes a full cycle that the end user actually is the key part. In all cases, I think what I mentioned, I think even if we start to talk about SMEs, then the business owner himself actually needs to be the one to actually appreciate that risk. Because end of the day, then looking at what will at the same time enable him to do business also needs to secure it at the same time as well.
Yeah. So actually, one question I have is really, as we discuss about cyber threats and some of the risks that we're looking at as a result of hybrid work environment, right? I'd like to talk about small and medium enterprises, right? Do you think that they are particularly vulnerable in this sense, and why, right? That we need to think about well, whether is it true that they are particularly vulnerable, and what are your thoughts on that?
For me, I think it's needless to say that they are particularly vulnerable because SMEs, as the name already suggests, they have very limited resources, and many times they are really trying to float the business, and they don't have the competencies to actually address something that is quite remote from their business, which is cybersecurity or even IT general controls. So that being said, I think it's a quite a given that SMEs are clearly under threat, and the challenge exists because they are also more numerous than the than the MNCs, right? The MNCs can aggregate a lot more resources. They can mobilize them for the purposes of addressing cybersecurity risk. As I mentioned earlier in my presentation, there needs to be that very clear understanding what is the competency and capacity within the organization to be able to address cybersecurity. And if not, the natural conclusion would then be you need to borrow resources from somewhere, or you need to buy resources from somewhere. And that would be outsourced service providers, whether is it managed security services, which comes in many different tiers of offerings, and what other kind of baseline controls can you do, whether it's like what we mentioned, establishing password managers for all your access, establishing multi-factor authentication, making sure that as a baseline configuration of your solutions, your laptops, your mobile phones, your tablets, they have all the minimum security all done there. And these would, I think, be classified as the new cyber hygiene baseline that SMEs can adopt. When I'm reflecting about what are available resources out there, I can call out off the top of my head, CSA actually has the Go Safe Online program.
Right.
We have IMDA that has the Go Digital programs for businesses. And on those websites, they are also calling out trusted partners that are capable to deliver reasonably priced solutions for all these SMEs that are embracing these new technologies and moving into a digital operating model. So I guess off the top of my head, those are some resources that SMEs can really capitalize on and be able to work through a more economical manner to embrace cybersecurity defense measures.
Correct. So what you're saying, that there's a lot of resources available, right? That's going to be able to support some of the actions that SMEs can take, right, to really secure their organizations, right?
So I will add to that. I think I did flash that in the last slide. So one of the things which is that the resources are there, and the ecosystem is actually improving in the sense that it gets tighter and the awareness of outreach becomes more. I mean, in the past, I would say that that's now been more prevalent even for the business associations. They start to recognize, cybersecurity becomes something they need to also do for their members and things like that. On the other part, I think when we said, one of the things that not only say that SMEs is definitely vulnerable, but they're also becoming very attractive. Because if you talk about, like what we say, right, as the part of the whole supply chain, they are also connected to the MNC. And I think when we talk about the earlier digital exposure, I think as you get connected to more of your supply chain, right, over time and through digital means, it also means that you actually have control, I think, over all your due diligence to actually look at all your suppliers, how vulnerable are they, that becomes actually becoming a tighter question. And of course, if you can, you actually have, I would say, a no choice, because in order for you to maintain, you might have to broaden even your supply chain, because now you have to look at alternate suppliers, and in the short time, you actually need to do the same due diligence. So sometimes that becomes a part that could be overlooked as well.
I want to add on that point. I think the supply chain is absolutely very important. Many a times as a cost of doing business, we extend gifts to our employees, for example. And that could just be a florist engagement that you have with SME, right? This small florist shop that is nearby to your office premises. So it's like, okay, I will submit, these are the details, these are the address, please send it to my employee because of some celebrations that you want to do. And by that notion, not knowing what's the cybersecurity position of that SME, you might actually have already exposed yourself in terms of the PII, personal identifiable information. Now, at that point in time when that SME gets compromised in one way, that set of data which is related to you also gets exposed. I think many a times we fail to recognize that these small organizations are very integrated into the way of doing business. Likewise, it goes towards couriers, our local last mile couriers that help us send one parcel to another building, for example, or even the cleaning facilities where they are delivering new products into just for a logistics outcome. So the SMEs become a necessary extension of the digital attack surface of every organization that we operate. And that really needs a detailed understanding of how far does your digital boundary really go, so that you can then address whether is it alternatives or you find ways of influencing the SMEs to be able to build up a more reasonable cyber defense posture for your consumption purposes.
So do you think that SMEs today, do they really see this as an important area in their business strategy? Do they really take this seriously? What's your thoughts on that, right? And do they factor in cybersecurity as part of their business strategy, right? What's your views on that?
I think that I would like to think that they actually prioritize cybersecurity. But the reality as we reach out to the SMEs is that they know it exists, it is a point of concern, but there is existential problems that they need to address as an SME. Bringing the bacon onto the table is the top priority, and they will take the chances of down prioritizing cybersecurity until such point that they feel more comfortable addressing it. Now, the problem with that statement is just that we are human, right? If we never pay attention to it, it is a lower priority. That time that we revisit this concern could be a very, very long time, if not never. And so many times the SMEs that are very focused or concerned about cybersecurity are the ones that have been bitten before. In my mind, I can relate towards the SMEs like K-Box, for example. And clearly, when that kind of incident hits, it is also existential. They could be out of a business straight away. Or they really learn the hard lessons and then they come out stronger. So it's a bit of that toss-up. I would like to think that cyber is a part of their business strategy. But many a times, I think existential problems are more important for them.
Yeah, I mean, today in the current economic climate, right, there are a lot more pressing needs and concerns on the minds of SMEs, I would say, right, because business is always a challenge. The environment is not getting, the optimism or pessimism around the environment, the business environment is not getting better in a sense. The question is then, how should we balance that, right, with the cybersecurity needs? Because one is, the lack of a real threat, sometimes it will, cause a bit of deprioritization, but we always know that with the increase of cyber activities, these are real threats coming up, right? I mean, how do businesses balance it, right? Yeah.
So I think, coming from the earlier part, I think like what Chandra mentioned, right? You get hit once, that is one driver. The other one, of course, if you are...
Take it seriously.
No, in fact, actually, sometimes it speeds up the justification for them to management and so on. And that's when it becomes a business discussion. So one of the things I think today when, it's also a challenge for a lot of, I would say, security professionals. How do you make that? Even at the multinational level, I think sometimes that business discussion, it needs to be a business discussion. So that risk mindset needs to be able to translate into something that shows them, if example, I think we want to expand the business. Okay, yes, maybe we don't have enough budget to mitigate risk if we want to go globally. Example, then let's restrict it. We can actually not grow so fast and then just contain to, regions and where we, from the risk perspective, actually the compromise, things like fraud, all this is actually lesser. That will actually help. So it becomes part of that business decision, right? You no longer just, say that, you have to put the best. You have to look at, okay, if that's fine, we are good to just grow the business that much, what is needed. So that actually mitigates the cost consideration as well of the business as well. Yeah.
I think one other possible motivation factor could be cyber insurance, the notion of cyber insurance. And in that sense, I tend to think that cyber insurers actually play a good motivation role to help businesses understand what is baseline cybersecurity hygiene measures that needs to be taken, because there is a dollars and cents that they are putting on the table. If you're not assessed to be hygienic enough, your premiums go up a certain price, or I may not render you the necessary payouts that you are expecting because you are not at that level that I see you in terms of your maturity with cybersecurity. So that could be one motivating factor, especially SMEs that are willing and they have considered that, I want to be able to address business risk for cyber in the form of an insurance, because anyway, I will buy business insurance. So that could be an angle of motivation for SMEs as well.
Yeah.
So I can add to that. So I agree with everything that's been said. So my proposal also is that maybe businesses can view it as part of the operating cost, right?
Yeah.
So for example, if you're in the food business, you allocate for spoilage, you allocate for pilferage, you allocate for storage, right? So having security software, having password managers or hardware tokens can be part of the operating cost and part of the, how you conduct business, right? And if you view it that way, I think it changes also the perspective. Also, for example, as I've already mentioned, food business already, you have certain restrictions or guidelines when you're in the food business, right? So you need to have certain hygiene in handling the food. You can only store certain things for a certain period of time at this particular temperature, So you need to also put into consideration something similar for cyber. So you can put measures in place so that your employees also don't do the same things, similar to how you address regulation that is specific to your business.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for the lively discussion in the panel. I would like to, take the last 17 minutes or so really to open up the panel for Q&A, right? And I would like the audience, right, to be able to pose your questions online in the Q&A section. But at the same time, we also can open the floor for people who would like to ask the questions, right? And I see that someone has raised the hand. Maybe I would like to invite Moon to speak up and ask your questions if you have any. Yeah. Hi, Moon. Hello.
Still on mute, I think.
Hi, Moon Sherry. I understand you have raised your hand. Either that or it could be a accidental press on the button. Okay, why don't we open the floor for questions, Q&A. If anyone has questions, please feel free to enter into the Q&A section. Okay, there's one question that came in. Could you elaborate more on the considerations an organization should take into account in deciding whether to take up cyber insurance?
Maybe I'll have a stab at that since I introduced that topic. I think cyber insurance is necessary the moment you know that the majority of your business is run on digital. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a storefront, you have a website, you have an application that you're offering as a means of conducting business. I think at minimum, and I think the conversation also came up in some questions, is that majority of us in embracing productivity for the business, we're using Microsoft 365. And as a side, you might be actually using a customer relationships management tool. You could be doing some inventory management solutions, and all these are already digital in nature. Now, unless you are a pure brick and mortar business, which is very rare today, but I know that they exist. But unless you are of that nature of a business, clearly you don't have to consider cyber insurance. But if any part of your business touches digital, I would say you have to consider cyber insurance. That's my opinion.
Yeah. So to add on to that, I think insurance is always a risk evaluation as well. Correct. So digital actually is part of that risk that you already actually established. But the other part is how I would say how much risk that will actually determine your premium, as well as in the end what do you actually want to be covered for. To be clear, I think most of the time today cyber insurance does not cover the losses, but it covers the cost of recovery in a lot of cases. So in that context, there are areas where it helps you to mitigate the cost of incident response. That's one way. It can actually mitigate some of the fines if in due diligence that unfortunately you are targeted and so on, but it will actually help to address that. But I think with what I mentioned in the latest, that may be a concern because if the amount is too much, it also means you actually have to pay a lot to even maintain that insurance. So all this is like what you say is a dollar and cents, and it's also actually where it becomes a risk consideration. And insurance is actually part of that whole risk consideration because it helps to mitigate part of the costs. Yeah.
I think some of my conversations with insurers that provide cyber insurance is also the notion that they are providing it akin to riders, that because you are buying business insurance already. So as an add-on, we can cover certain aspects of cyber insurance, like what Johnny mentioned. I could be dealing with just the response costs that you need to deal with. I won't deal with the losses that you are making. Or I could be saying that after your remediation, I could be able to cover for you to go through an assessment to really understand where you are now that you have recovered, and will you have additional gaps that you need to cover going forward, things like that. So there is the standalone cyber insurance, and there is the cyber insurance that acts as riders on top of business insurance. For SMEs, my understanding is that those that want to take up cyber insurance, they will take the business insurance with the rider, and less of the pure cyber insurance that exists. So these two options already are available.
Okay. So I think it makes sense to complement what you already have as a business insurance, right? And then on top of that, to be able to cover yourself in the cyber security area as well. Okay, next question is, what do you see as emerging cybersecurity risks in the next 12 to 18 months? And what is your advice to organizations in preparing ourselves for that?
Maybe I can start off.
Yeah, it's a
concept.
Next 12 to 18 months. Yeah.
Again, the reality is that there's nothing new. I think if we come from an angle, as we look at all the different threats, it's nothing new. It just gets more sophisticated. It just gets more, but there's nothing really new and emerging. So sometimes you want to say the same issues occur today. I mean, if you want to say, if you forget to patch, that has been a long long issues is that means basically you still expose yourself to vulnerabilities and malware and things like that. In fact, one of the key things that I think as we move ahead, the human factor becomes a very key part. As much as we look at it, I think the human factor is what drives the business, right? And like what I said, the data piece. At the same time, it is also the weakest thing. So in the end, as much technology you put in place, the human portion needs to be further reinforced, I think, in as it goes on. It has to become progressively, what I call mindset means that you have to start to instill that it becomes, I would say the other way is common sense as we talk about it. I think today, I would say that even as simple things that if we start to see that people still walk away from their machines without locking the screen and things like that. And I mean, some of this could be mitigated, but it's that mindset that you need to have subconsciously just be able to do certain things. Even once you look at emails, if it's something of a critical transaction, take a step back and things like that. I mean, these are things where it actually helps. So the human part is really the one that you need to prepare. And yeah, I think that will be a key part. And also to educate them, I think how to respond and so on. That will actually be the part when something happens as well.
Oh, Ryan,
I think maybe if I can say some things first. I agree with what Johnny said. I think the pressure of the threat actor will continue. That's a given. But I think just maybe calling out a few threat intelligence trends that we are picking up is clearly, if we put into the whole scheme of things, what is going to happen in the first place on the global stage, right, in the next 12 to 18 months. Number one, there will be that whole wave of additional payouts that governments will want to deliver to help alleviate people's problems with regards to financial positions. Number two will clearly be about vaccine access and vaccine distribution. So when we take that into context, right, there are a few key aspects that will be clearly, if I'm the threat actor, I will pay a bit more attention. Number one, I will target government portals that are either giving out financial assistance or providing registration opportunities towards the access to vaccination or healthcare, right? And I brought up the topic of healthcare. So healthcare service providers will be targeted. Now, we recently saw the situation where in Germany, a patient had to die because the institution that was closest in proximity for the patient was actually not accessible due to ransomware, and they cannot accommodate any further. So healthcare providers, despite the fact that we know conversations have been made between certain cyber professionals and the threat actors to say that, okay, actually hospitals and this kind of thing, when it comes to human safety, I don't want to deal with it. But we must understand that healthcare service providers, not everyone is as vigilant in terms of cybersecurity. And cyber doesn't pick it's like the bullet never picks its victim. If I fire it in a straight line, whoever stands in the way will get shot. So I wouldn't say, oh, because you're a healthcare provider, I won't shoot you. It just so happens that I don't have the safety net to be able to address it. And so I will become a victim. So I think healthcare providers will be next. Pharmaceuticals already seeing some increased threat because there is interest for espionage to take place, to take advantage of the recipes, I'll put it loosely, of what a vaccine would look like, or even the supplementary care products that would enable better recovery towards COVID-19 victims. So these are some of the trends that I would say would see a lot more threat actor attention. And then the last part, I think, is really about collateral damage, which is the SMEs. Like just for Singapore, our hawker have actually gone through a very accelerated digital transformation wave. But despite them now doing businesses in a very digital fashion, they may not have the capability or capacity to actually deal with cyber defense measures. And so they will have a lot of collateral damage opportunities, right, with regards to these SMEs that have just suddenly jumped into the digital bandwagon, but not really understanding what digital means, much less to say about what cyber means for them.
All right, yeah.
So, I mean, just to add to those very good points that was already mentioned, I think identity theft would be something that would be on the rise in the next few months, just because we are in a very unstable economic situation. So people, I mean, actors using the identity for government claims, insurance claims, benefits, and other things that are related to that might be on the rise, because just because of the situation that we are in, the uncertainty in the future, and then because of the economic slump that's about to happen.
Yeah, I think just to add on that, generally it is a known fact that when there is a depression in the economy, fraud is more rampant. And that's really because you have more survival instincts kicking in. People will want to be able to get the necessary financial support that they need. And whether is it fraud in the nature of falsifying that I am so and so to be able to get the benefits, or that I'm actually, from a business to business perspective, I'm cheating each other, your employees cheating yourself. So insider threats are also burgeoning in this notion, particularly about the disgruntled employee. Whenever there's a retrenchment conversation or performance dip, especially in this climate, you tell somebody that your performance has been bad, it's like, I've always been doing it this way. So why is it that because of COVID-19, you choose to say that my performance is bad? So you're already picking on me. So that disgruntled sentiment begins, and that insider threat risk actually burgeons. So just wanted to address the fraud and insider threat risk.
Thanks everyone for your. I want to thank the panelists, Xiangzhen, Ryan, and Johnny, right, for your inputs and for your answers to the questions. I'd like to hand this time back to Mei Hui to close off for today's session. Really a very interesting and lively discussion we had, and really thank the participant and attendees for your questions as well.
Yep. Thanks, Kevin, and also thanks to Xiangzhen, Ryan, and Johnny for very insightful sharing. So just to wrap up, I think some of the points highlighted during the panel session was actually a bit different, I would say, from during the sharing, because as we discussed, we did realize that the whole ecosystem and the supply chain is very, very integrative. So it's not just one particular industry that can be affected, because even if the attack is happening to someone, other companies along the line will get hit along the way or have some other impact. So I think that is something important and a great takeaway. And overall, of course, there's a lot of things that we could learn as well, or to take upon our own work from home habits, even as an individual, to play a more vigilant role within the organization, to be aware of some of the cyber threats that can be going on, and of course not to be an easy target for the criminals to prey on. So with that, also thank you everyone for your time.